guys, this week I thought I would do a Teutonic Knight figure for you. I've had a sort of appropriate model banging around in my random bits box for a while, and I've always liked it, but it just never felt like the appropriate occasion. But you know, this week I was looking for something to paint and it just kind of felt right. And besides that, I've had, I think, at least one person on my channel asking, you know, if I could do a figure like this. So, you know, that was all the more incentive. The model I have here, I'll show you, is this guy. So he's on foot, and he's by Gripping Beast. They have a nice collection of Teutonic Knights from the sort of the Crusader-era, but he's got all the classic hallmarks. He's got really big and bulky, big great helmet, horns, you know, big axe, just everything you kind of expect basically from this period and this type of soldier. I should point out that he's been modified a little bit. This figure should be carrying an axe, but it's, I think, originally supposed to be a smaller axe for this particular figure. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, that little axe went missing, so I didn't have it, but I did have this bigger axe that is carried by another one of the models in this figure pack, but not this guy. But basically, in order to make it work, I had to kind of drill his hands out extra and then kind of cut the handle of the axe in half and put it back together so that, you know, it looked like he was holding it properly. So a whole bunch of extra work, maybe beyond what it should be, but I mean, the results are still just fine looking and perfectly appropriate for this figure in this period. Paint scheme wise, this should not be, you know, anything too unusual. I'm going to go for a really traditional paint scheme, which means a lot of black and especially white, which were the colors that the Teutonic Order were most famous for wearing. So, you know, if you're looking for more, you know, help on brushing up on those, this will be a good tutorial for you. And otherwise, I think this should be a pretty simple and pretty straightforward figure to paint. Since white is really the most important color on this figure, I'm going to be painting those areas first, and that includes part of his tunic and also his cloak. I'm applying a base coat here of Vallejo Sky Gray. I'm not too worried about getting good coverage immediately. The important thing is to make sure that the layers you apply are very smooth and even. Even if some of the black undercoat shows through, that's okay. You can go back in and apply another layer or two until you've got a nice even coverage. Now you can see even after several layers that some of that black undercoat is still showing through, but it's still a very even coat, just a little bit transparent. What I'm going to do now is continue applying Sky Gray, but I'm going to start kind of building it up a little bit in areas that I want to end up eventually being lighter. So I'm going to apply, you know, several more layers and kind of blend it out a little bit down into those areas that are going to be kind of in shadow. So sort of the deep folds and creases in his cloak are a good example of that. I'm now going to continue highlighting with a 50-50 mix of white and that sky gray. And I'm just going to really start applying it again to those areas that I know I want to be brighter and wider. So you can see I'm really focusing on the tops of those various folds in the cloak and kind of trying to leave the areas where there's going to be shadows, kind of leave that, you know, base color a little bit more. But of course, all these colors we're working with here are very, very transparent, so you really want to build up multiple layers of all these colors that you're applying here. So I'm going to be going over the figure a couple of times, and I'm going to continue applying more and more coats. Now, sometimes when I'm painting white, I don't bother with this sort of mid-gray-white step. I would just go straight up to white. But if it's, in this case, it's such a prominent, important part of the figure, the white, that I want to make sure that I get more subtlety and just more range of color. So that's why I'm spending a little bit more time and just, you know, applying this extra kind of intermediate color to those areas. I'm now just moved on to pure white, and I'm doing exactly the same thing. I'm just applying the white to the areas where I would expect light to be hitting, and I'm going to keep building it up because the white, particularly, you can see after just one coat, it's still very gray looking. A lot of the color underneath is going to show through. So you really have to keep applying a lot of layers. And you can go really far with this. Yeah, that is to say, you can go on really long applying layers of white paint and still not have a really pure bright white. I think I probably continued going over this figure, kind of layering on white for maybe 5 or 6 coats at least before I got it sort of up to the brightness level that I was happy with. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, you can take a little bit of a shortcut by, just doing several layers of a thin white to build up some sort of different graduated tones. And then if you want to just skip ahead and get a really high bright white quickly, you can then apply a thicker, less diluted white to really high areas. And by doing that, you can kind of get done quicker and, not have to necessarily go over the figure and coat it so many times. But I went ahead and did lots of thin layers just because I liked all of the extra subtle kind of variation I got from that process. I'm now going to go ahead and base coat the black areas, which includes sort of his reinforced sort of metal and cloth vest that he's wearing, and also the handle of his axe. I'm going for black here. It's a little bit of a more unconventional choice, but I thought it'd be a little bit more interesting than kind of usual wood color that you would normally see here. Now I'm going to grab some German gray and I'm going to start highlighting those black areas. And I'm also going to use the German gray to give a base coat to sort of the fur collar that he's got on his cape. I'm going to kind of go with a kind of a brownish gray look here eventually, but this makes for a good undercoat. And as far as the armored shirt goes, I'm just going to sort of pick out the individual panels in this color, and then with the shaft of the axe, I'm really kind of just focus the color really all over, except sort of just around where it joins with the axe head. I'm going to leave a little bit of dark shadows underneath those regions. Next, I've grabbed some dark blue gray, and I have taken that and mixed it into the German gray, and I'm going to apply that sort of as a highlight to the various areas. You can see with the sort of separate plates on his armor, I'm just kind of applying the color along the edges and sort of feathering it out a little bit. I want to just have really sort of extra highlights on the edge panels and really only leave the black down in between. And with this lighter color, you can see on the axe shaft, I'm focusing it really along the top. I'm then going to finish off just with a little bit of pure dark blue gray. I think I actually even cut it with a little bit of sky gray just to get a little bit lighter, and I'm going to use that to apply one sort of final edge highlight, particularly to those armored panels, and just lightly sort of along the top of the axe shaft where a lot of light is hitting. I took that color, so basically this sort of slightly light and dark blue gray, and I then mixed some beige brown into it, and I'm going to use that to sort of start highlighting his fur collar. I want this to be kind of a grayish fur, but I want to have this sort of brownish warm tone to it, which will make it look more like fur and also help distinguish it from other parts. So at this point, I'm applying it to most of the collar area, but I'm really focusing it particularly towards the edge. And I'm actually going to, while it's wet, I'm going to do a little bit of wet blending, apply some black and a German gray along near the neck area and sort of blend it outwards so that it's darker towards his neck and sort of lighter as it moves away. I'm now going to start working on the leather areas of this figure. I'm using some German camouflage black brown here to base coat his belt and also the scabbard of his sword and the handle on his dagger and his little sort of purse that he's carrying. I didn't do the scabbard of his dagger yet or the handle on his sword because I'm going to do them in a different shade of leather because I don't want everything to look too samey here. But I'm just going to go over it a couple of times at this point to make sure that I get a good even base coat. Now I'm going to go ahead and highlight these first leather areas. I'm using chocolate brown to start out with, and I'm applying that pretty heavily. I'm really only leaving the German camouflage black brown as sort of a lining color to find in between different pieces. I'm putting the chocolate brown pretty generously everywhere else and even building it up to get some brighter colors where I expect it to be more light. And then I'm going to mix a bit of beige brown into my chocolate brown and use that as the next highlight layer on the leather. And I'm just going to, again, I'm going to apply it most places here, but I'm going to sort of focus it sort of more in sort of the middle areas of each piece and sort of blend it out so I get more dark variation, because you want more of that light and dark tone going on with the leather. I'm then going to move up to just pure beige brown, doing the same thing but just a little bit less, blending it out a little bit more, trying to keep it thinner, and just being generally a little bit more subtle about how and where I apply it, just a little bit less. And then my final step here is really just going to be to take some Iraqi sand and mix it into my beige brown. I'm going to apply that then as sort of a very sort of subtle sort of lining, sort of edge highlight to the belt, straps, and handles, sort of along the seams in the scabbard and sort of the worn areas on the purse. I'm going to just be real careful about this. I actually got a little bit more onto the scabbard than I wanted. I ended up going back and doing a little bit of touch-up work to sort of tone it down and get a little bit darker after I was finished with this. The knight's also wearing sort of a padding, quilted padding underneath his armor, and I'm just going to quickly base coat that right now using Vallejo khaki, and we'll come back to it later and do some more work on that. And I want to highlight that fur collar a little bit further. So I've made this kind of mix of gray and brown again, but now it's a lighter gray. So I've kind of mixed some sky gray, a lot of sky gray, and just darkened it a bit with German gray, and then mixed quite a bit of beige brown or chocolate brown. It really doesn't matter, just some brown to get kind of a light grayish brown shade. And I'm going to apply that along the edges of the fur. I'm then going to take some Agrex Earthshade and use that to help shade his Under Armour padding. And I'm also going to apply it to the fur collar, which is going to help further sort of define down in the different strands of fur and warm the whole color up even further. When that washes dry, I'm going to kind of start finishing off the Under Armour padding. First, I'm going to make a mixture, about 50-50 of khaki and Iraqi sand, and I'm going to use that to sort of apply an all-over highlight to the padding. I'm really only going to leave the pure khaki sort of down in between the different panels as sort of a defining edge highlight color here. I'm then going to finish up highlighting the padding first by just taking pure Iraqi sand and applying it sort of along sort of all the edges of those separate pieces, and making it a little darker towards the center, and also leaving it darker where it goes underneath his tunic. And then I'm going to finish up by mixing Iraqi sand with white and applying one final really bright highlight to those areas. I'm now moving on to the steel kind of metal areas of this figure, which are pretty substantial. I'm going to base coat everything first with a mixture of German gray and Vallejo Air gunmetal. And there's a lot to cover here, so make sure you get everything. I'm going to be painting all of his chainmail in this color, and then of course any other sort of metal parts, which include sort of his shoes, which are kind of covered in metal, and his helmet of course, and naturally the blade of his axe. And you just want to make sure that you get a good, really thorough base coat here, and make sure all your paint gets down in all of those little holes and sort of things that are created by the chainmail being there. Now I'm going to highlight the metal areas using just pure Vallejo Air gunmetal. Now with things like the helmet and the axe and the shoes, I'm going to apply pretty smooth, even coats. I'm going to keep it a fairly thin coat, but I'm going to keep it, well, I'm just going to go for a nice, smooth, even coverage here and blend it a little bit where I can. With the chainmail, I want it to be even lighter, so I'm going to kind of do a little bit of overbrushing here. So I'm going to take my gunmetal, put it on the brush, then wipe a good bit of it off on the palette. We're not going for a dry brush here, so don't wreck your brush. Just get some of the excess paint off, and then you're just going to want to lightly kind of brush it over the surface of the chainmail. And I'm even going to apply less down in the areas where I would want there to be more shadow, like under his arms, for example, and between his legs. I'm not going to apply very much of this sort of highlight color in those particular places. Now I'm going to apply a pretty generous Nuln oil wash to all of those metal areas, but particularly the chainmail. I'm going to keep it a little bit lighter on his helmet and weapon and boots, and really load it on the chainmail because I really want it going down in all those little crevices. And you can put extra underneath his arms in areas that would be in shadow, so kind of use that wash to really sort of build up and emphasize sort of shaded areas on the model. I'm now going to take pure gunmetal again, and I'm going to start reapplying it over the areas where I just put the wash on, and I'm gonna sort of blend it out into some of the areas that have been shaded by the wash, so I get a little bit more different kind of tone and shade going on. As far as the chainmail is concerned, I'm going to do another overbrush, but I'm going to keep it way lighter and more subtle than the last one I did. It's just going to be really, you know, I don't want too much on, so I'm going to be real careful not to overdo it. I'm really going to focus it specifically on areas where I want it to look like light is hitting the armor, because we want the chainmail to look darker than the rest of the armor. Now I'm going to grab some Vallejo Air Steel. I'm going to use that to start highlighting the metal. And I'm going to be particularly using this color on the boots and the helmet and the axe head. I'm really not going to apply this at all to the chainmail. I don't want it to get any lighter or shinier than it already is. So you can see I'm really just sort of building it up on those areas. I'm going to try to blend it out a little bit into the areas that I already have. And you can see here I'm also going to pick out those metal studs on his armor. I didn't paint them before now because there's no point with an area this small. You just kind of wait and then just highlight them with your brightest color, and that's all you need. With the helmet, it's a little bit more complicated. You're going to want to spend some time, you know, picking out the areas on sort of the top of his head and around his eyes and all the banding and stuff. And on the axe head, you can see I'm really emphasizing the cutting surface of his blade with that steel, and then kind of trying to blend it out a little bit on the rest. I actually spent quite a bit of time, and I didn't show on camera, fiddling with the metal just to get the colors right. I went back in, applied some more washes here and there to get a more even, darker tone, and I blended in some extra gunmetal. You're just going to have to want to tweak this a little bit, especially on his helmet, just to help define those eye holes and air vents and all those different bits. I even used a little bit of black paint to apply some edging in there just to get it really the way I want it. And you may too probably find that you need to just kind of fiddle around to get a nice clean look and, you know, sort of good shading that's not too intense on these areas. Now I'm going to go back in with some Vallejo black red, and I'm going to use it to base coat two different areas here. One area is these other parts of his, you know, belts and scabbards and stuff that I didn't paint before. I'm base coating them in red because I want to have sort of a red leather in these areas. I'm also going to be painting, see the sort of the inner lining of his tunic. You probably wondered before why I didn't paint, and this is why. I wanted to paint this area red just to get a really nice pop of color to contrast with the otherwise fairly brown, dull, gray kind of figure. So you can see I'm just applying this red color as a sort of initial base coat for those regions. To continue highlighting the red leather areas, I've mixed some beige brown into the black red, and I'm applying that sort of as a first highlight. You can see I'm just picking out the individual areas and making sure I leave the black red in between to define any different areas or any seams or bands or that kind of thing. You can kind of see where that should be and figured it out. And then I just added a bit more beige brown to get an even lighter, browner shade. I'm going to apply that as a second highlight, just building it up over the same areas, getting some lighter tones in. I then made one final really extreme highlight by mixing a bit of Iraqi sand into the color that I just made, and you can see me here applying that just really along the edges. It's really very much an edge highlight, just as this extra, really sort of subtle emphasis. I'm now going to just paint that red area really, really quick. I'm just taking Citadel Mephiston red here as my first highlight. I'm just layering it on over the black red. You can see I'm going to build it up a little bit just because I applied it thinly to begin with, and I'm just layering it to get a more intense color going, basically. And then once I've gotten that about as bright as I want, I'm then going to switch over to Evil Sun Scarlet, which is basically just a brighter, even more intense red color from Citadel, and I'm going to layer that over top again, and so I'll get, you know, just a really nice, bright, vivid scarlet. And I think it's not very much. It's just this really small area, but I think it's a really great sort of focal point and pop of color on this figure. The only thing really left to do on this figure now is to paint the sort of gold brass areas. which in this case mostly includes sort of the hardware on his sword and dagger that I hadn't really handled yet, and also his horns, which I decided early on I was going to do in gold, just like the example that was on the Gripping Beast website for this figure. So I'm first base coating those areas with a mixture of Citadel Jenna Gold and German camouflage brown from Vallejo, and you want a lot more of the brown in there because Jenna Gold is quite a red orange gold shade and you need to tone it down a lot. I'm just going to highlight those areas then a little bit more by mixing a bit more Jenna Gold into that base color to get a slightly lighter shade and just kind of applying it again over top. It's not such of a big deal with the hardware on his sword and dagger, but on the horns you're going to want to spend a little bit more time kind of blending it out and leaving sort of darker colors towards the base and sort of on the inner surface of the horns where you would expect less light to be hitting. To finish off, I'm going to take some pure Jenna Gold and go very, very lightly over those areas. Too much isn't not very great in my opinion, because I really think things start to get too orange and red looking. It's just a little bit of a weird effect, so you have to be a little bit careful with the Jenna Gold, but I'm going to layer it lightly over all those areas. Again, you can see with the horns I'm really focusing the brighter colors towards the top and kind of blending them out as I go down. I decided to kind of cool down the real redness of that shade by making a mixture of Vallejo-era silver and Jenna Gold, and then just using that to apply some very thin edge highlights to all the hardware, and even on the horns too a little bit, specifically along the top edges there. And here's our finished Knight Templar figure. This is, I think, a really great example of how you can get really good results with a figure that is mostly painted in extremely neutral tones. Lots of black and white and gray going on here, and kind of browns, and pretty somber for the most part, but then just with a few really well-chosen sort of emphasis colors to really make the whole thing pop and draw the eye, like that sort of red inner lining to his cloak makes a great focal point, and also those bright gold horns are sort of the second sort of point that your eye really focuses on. And I think if you're going to paint a sort of a very neutral sort of somber figure like this, it is important to find some way to like put some even very small element of bright color on there, because it just will make the whole figure come alive. If you don't do that, no matter how well you paint it, it's going to be easy to kind of pass over, and it's just not going to have the same kind of visual impact. So even if it's something as small as just a pom-pom or, you know, some painted insignia, try to find some way, even with these especially more dull figures, to bring a little bit of color in. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do like it, share it on all the sort of social media that you have. Leave me comments with what you thought, of course, and do subscribe, of course, as well, if you have not done so already. So that is all for now, and I will see you next week.